Well, yesterday was a dramatic election day in Alberta politics, but today, political pollsters are the ones with egg on their faces. The polls predicted a seismic shift, with all of them suggesting the upstart Wild Rose Party would defeat the Progressive Conservatives. But when the ballots were counted, there was a shock when the reverse happened. Dana Hutchings has more in tonight's Checkpoint.
Jim, Alberta voters stunned pollsters by giving the PC party not only a win, but a majority government. Premier Alison Redford's party taking 61 of 87 seats, the Wild Rose just 17 seats. Yet every poll conducted in the weeks leading up to the election predicted a Wild Rose win. So much so that one of the pollsters had to admit today, we were all wrong.
An easy win that it seems came as a surprise to nearly everyone.
Oh my.
The pundit said it was going to be a tight race. Polls suggested that it was the right-wing Wild Rose Party that had the edge over the PC dynasty. Not long after the polls closed last night, did reality and a big Conservative majority set in.
But it looks like they were wrong and they made a bunch of mistakes with what they predicted.
The polls might have been off, but some say there were other factors at play.
The Liberal Party collapsed. Where did those voters go? They went to the Progressive Conservatives. Really, as a vote for Alison Redford, as much as a vote to keep the Wild Rose out of office.
Those who voted strategically feel a little slighted by the PC landslide.
I feel as if I wasted my vote listening to the pundits beforehand, and it's a shame that I wasn't able to vote more with my conscience.
It also appears that the final week of the campaign hurt Wild Rose's popularity. A few of its candidates made controversial comments about homosexuality and race.
I still believe that you have to allow people to be able to exercise their faith in their own way. So I'm not the kind of leader that's going to throw my people under the bus at the first sign of trouble.
Now Wild Rose will lead the official opposition, and it will be the PCs who will continue a political legacy.
UVic political scientist Michael Prince says he believes the spiraling of the polls really turned into a bandwagon effect in Alberta. He thinks maybe we should look to Facebook and Twitter to get a more accurate view of how people are voting.
Canadians' identification, perhaps unlike their parents or grandparents, they're not as tied to a party as perhaps former generations. They're more like consumers. They're shopping, they're listening, they're tweeting, and at the last moment, if a friend says this or that, that might be what tips the balance. And so I'm not sure if we really fully understand anymore how people vote. I think polls are based on a more traditional notion of how people decide who they're going to support or not.
And that leads to our Checkpoint question tonight. Do you trust political polls?
Dana Hutchings is back with your Checkpoint responses.
Jim, what pundits predicted as the tightest race in Alberta in decades left them shocked and wondering how everyone got it so wrong. It seems a shift in the final days and strategic voting may have played a role. In all this, there's a silver lining for our Premier. Christy Clark has been down in the polls here for months.
And so, I phoned her last night and congratulated her, and I said, Alison, how did the pollsters get it so wrong? And she said, Christy, I can't believe that you, of all people, are asking me that.
So you think the polls are wrong here, Bridget?
Well, I've said to you guys all along, I don't put a whole lot of stock in polls. I think that it is absolutely true that the poll that matters is the one on election day.
And our Checkpoint question tonight, do you trust political polls? Here are some of what you had to say.
Well, I think polls can read just about anything people want them to read, so I would take it with a grain of salt.
I guess you have to sort of look at what they did in their poll in the first place to determine if the sampling was reasonable.
It always seems like they're too convenient or something. I don't know. It's any poll, not just political, though. Most polls I don't really trust.
Sure I do.
Yeah? And why would you trust them?
Why would they lie?
I don't trust anything politicians say.
It's tough to say. Do I trust polls? Yeah, they tell one side of the story. Depends who they poll.
Unsure of how they do the actual, keep the stats, you know what I mean? They might just take a cross-section of a certain group of people based on what serves their needs.
I don't, because ultimately it's people giving the polls, and human error can be the biggest problem.
And some of your social media responses. Sue says no, anyone can say anything in a poll. What counts is the official vote on voting day. Terry says, I wish polls were not allowed during an election. Then maybe people would vote the way they want rather than strategically. And David says, let me take a quick survey and I'll get right back to you. And the results of our web poll, 12% say yes, they do trust polls, while 88% say no, they don't. And one side note to the Alberta election, a familiar face to many, former CHEK News anchor Bruce McAllister ran for the Wild Rose Party and won. He defeated PC Energy Minister Ted Morton in what was considered a major upset. Congratulations to Bruce. And that's tonight's Checkpoint.